Good morning. This is Barry Bryson. I'm back again with another 5 good minutes with the Word. And today we're going to be introducing the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is unique in so many ways. It's the shortest of all the Gospels. It may represent the earliest of the Gospels. But just because it's brief doesn't mean it's not full of detail and unique information that we get nowhere else. It's clearly to a Gentile audience. Mark does take the time to explain Jewish customs and Jewish phrases. And it begins with the ministry of John the Baptist. Matthew goes all the way back to Abraham. Mark doesn't even go back to the birth of Jesus. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and then he talks about John the Baptist. Love that first verse, brief and to the point. I'm going to tell you about Jesus and the good news about him, and he's the Son of God. And let's start with John's preaching. And in the first chapter, we have so many things just in 45 verses. John's teaching, Jesus' baptism, Jesus' temptation, his healing, several healing miracles, casting out demons, praying in the morning, healing Peter's mother-in-law the night before. He makes a mission statement, then he heals some more, and we're just through chapter 1. It's this breakneck speed that's communicated by the word immediately, repeated over and over again. And I'm sure that's the way it seemed to the apostles when they remembered these events. Mark gives us little details that we get nowhere else in other Gospels, vivid details, cinematic detail that put us right in the middle of the story. When Jesus calms the storm in chapter 4, he's asleep in the back of the boat on a seat cushion with his head on the seat cushion. We don't get that detail anywhere else, and it puts us right there. We can see it in our mind's eye. Whenever he feeds the 5,000 and the people sit down, they sit down in orderly rows like garden rows, like the rows in the garden. We don't get that visual detail anywhere else, but we get it in Mark. He puts us in the middle of the story, and he does it in the way he structures the story. He leaves that little bit of information to the very end that we don't get anywhere else, in that way that keep us engaged. The way a Twilight Zone or an O. Henry story or a story by Philip K. Dick just gives us that bit of information at the end that keeps us riveted. When in the raising of Jairus's daughter, we don't find out to the very end that this little girl everyone's been talking about is 12 years old, which in our culture and in theirs as well was not a little girl, not a toddler, but a 12-year-old, just a year or two away of becoming engaged herself. And yet that's the way he tells the story. It makes one wonder whether or not he's recording preaching. The stories that were told verbally are being written down. This is not the kind of crafted gospel that we get in Luke, but something that really represents storytellers, someone who's delivering the word verbally and keeping us engaged as listeners. Who wrote this gospel? Well, Mark did. All the sources that we have that attribute an author attributed to Mark. But those sources also tell us that Mark is recording the things he heard from Peter. And so in a very real sense, this is Peter's gospel, I think. We do know from Peter's own writings, that from 2 Peter, that Mark was there with him at the end of his life, part of his staff. And so it very well may be that Mark's gospel represents his experience of what Peter was preaching to other people. Although I think there is a signature moment in Mark's gospel where he tells us, I was there too. When Jesus is arrested, in Mark chapter 14, verses 51 and 52, Mark tells us, a certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body, and they seized him, but he left the linen sheet behind and escaped naked. Why are these verses here? Why is this detail important if it's not Mark's own signature to his gospel? A way of saying to us, I was there when this happened, and I was part of this event. Well, we don't have really much time to talk about the ending of the Gospel of Mark, which is problematic for translators. In all the ancient manuscripts, what we know is that Mark, the original text that we have, probably ended somewhere around verse 8. And yet none of the old manuscripts that we have in the Gospel at verse 8. They continue to tell the story. I have a theory for why this is true, and I'll share it with you if you want to call me later on or ask me, but we've run out of minutes. We've already used 10 extra seconds of your time. Mark tells his gospel in such a way as it keeps us riveted to the story. So spend some time in Mark's Gospels with Jesus. You will not regret that time spent. Thank you for joining me. This is Barry Bryson, and we'll see you Monday when we talk about the gospel.